We accepted it.
Are you with him? Are you together?
No.
He's not with you. So
It's all right. I mean,
Yeah. Oh wow! Look at this. There we go.
I want to bring some facts.
Yes. Thank you. I was just talking about this, right?
Is this empirical evidence or is this a philosophical point?
That is a picture of a theory.
Okay, no. Okay, that theory...
Supported by empirical evidence.
Wait, 1 second. I'm asking him now, because we've had a few conversations
No, listen, I've got to say, I think this guy is very good.
Okay, he said that there was empirical evidence for the cyclical model. I said no. What do you think?
I'm continually saying I didn't say that.
By the way, we
did
can't
say that.
By the way, can
You
we?
said that at the beginning.
Can I say something? Can I say something? Because the discussion. Can we say something?
We want to talk to these two.
We want to talk to the. Let's talk to the guy here.
We want to talk to more civilized people.
Okay. If you need help, you could seek their help. Yeah, if you need help, you could seek their help.
I'm happy to stand for my own points.
Tony and Nicholas were talking to you, not talking to you. Just ignore
All
it.
right.
Speak your credibility.
No, don't entertain him.
You don't seem like you're a serious person if you won't be transparent.
Exactly. That's what we said before. I'm sorry, guys. You're derailing the discussion.
No, that's why. But it's a good discussion. Yes. Okay.
May I put some facts on the table? Okay.
Facts.
Empirical facts.
No.
Listen, let's discuss empirical
Allow me
facts.
to state the fact.
Okay, empirical facts.
Give me a minute and a half to put some facts on the table. I'm not drawing a conclusion as to how to contextualize or evaluate these facts. That's the job of these discussions, but hopefully we can just agree on what facts are, yeah? So, here's some scientists. Roger Penrose, he believes in conformal cyclic cosmology, which is that the universe is eternal. Here's a link, if you want it, and you can put it on any of your camera crews to where he says it.
All right.
I'm not saying he's right. I'm just saying it's a fact it's his name, it's a fact he got the Nobel Prize in 2020, it's a fact he believes that, and I can show you where to find it if you want to fact check me. Here is Frank Wilczek, who has got a Nobel Prize, and he thinks that there were electrons before the Big Bang. I'm not saying he's right, but I can give you a link to where he says it.
Okay.
This is Brian Greene, who's pretty well known, Columbia University Director of Central Physics. He thinks the Big Bang was not the beginning of the universe. Here's the link if any of your camera crews want it. I'm not saying they're not. The only fact I'm stating is that is that man's name. He has made that statement, and that is a link. It could all be nonsense. It could all be nonsense. But I would just like us to agree. We also have Stephen Hawking, physicist, debated his idea the universe went on forever. I have a link. Sean Carroll, who was awarded American Institute of Physics significant contribution, etc. He says my best guess is the universe did not have a beginning. I have a link. Brian Cox, a lot of you might have seen. I have a link. He says I strongly suspect the universe existed before. Okay? Now, I put these facts on the table, and I do not know if they're correct, but as a layman, most of us are laymen, and we have to decide who we're going to listen to.
Can I just show this to everybody? Sorry, 1 second. I just want to say, this is absolutely fine, but this has nothing to do with the discussion we were having.
Okay. Our discussion. Do you know the discussion?
Sorry, 1 second. Because you came in late, maybe you missed it. We weren't.
I don't want to ball goes into a conversation.
No,
that's fine.
Is this what I
These
said?
things, by the way, Tony,
Thank you.
these things are simply facts that we know that these people hold these opinions. But the discussion was on something different, which is, he said there's empirical evidence for the cyclical model.
Okay.
Now,
all I'm saying is that there are certain scientists who have Nobel Prizes and who are members of the National Association of Science, who as a layman I think I should possibly give a little bit of credibility to, because I ain't a physicist. I can be logical and I can see self-insistencies. My job is always to look to legitimate sources. Always be skeptical. I'm not saying I would believe them, but these guys do exist and they
What's his name, by the way? What's his name?
Their conclusion is that the universe...
Tony,
here's the thing.
Are those philosophical arguments?
No, because you're making an assertion about physics, these are physicists.
No, okay.
It's the correct thing.
Is it philosophical argument?
They're physics assertions because you're making assertions
you referenced Stephen Hawking, you referenced Lawrence Krauss, and you referenced Roger Penrose. Okay, each one of them has actually spoken about not only the physics but the philosophy side of things.
Fine, if you want to discuss philosophy, I'm happy to.
So what I'm trying to point to, and what I tried, Nicholas, right?
Yes.
What I tried to point out is, when we go from where we are right now, talking about redshift and what we observe, to the beginning of the universe, we are transferring from the field of physics to the field of philosophy.
There's an interface, no question.
But when we get right to the beginning, I believe it's philosophy.
I think philosophy is the core discipline.
Don't
get me wrong, okay? And I think
we don't disagree.
Okay, we do agree. Okay, I think the tool.
And I believe maths is the purest version of that.
Quite possible. I think the tool of philosophy is inference. Okay, inference consists of induction and deduction linked to an axiom. This is the one tool we're all using, be it in philosophy or the physical sciences. It's always the same tool. So what you've got to work out are what are my axioms. Now, I think an axiom that we all share is, I believe I live in a self-consistent universe. I don't think anyone objects to that, be you Christian, atheist, or
Can I ask a question on that?
Go ahead.
This is why I disagree, not yourself, and I'm not sure about you, but you definitely don't believe in scientism. When we have people using quantum physics to challenge the idea of self-consistency in the universe, I would say that's baloney. Would you agree with me?
With the contingency that the question itself may be flawed, because it's a complex question. Provisionally, I think I'd probably agree with you. I think physics is a discipline of physics.
Okay, but I'll ask you, why do you think it's a flawed question?
I'm not sure. I don't want to commit at this point, because I do think the question you asked my friend here before was, I suspect you asked him Russell's teapot, which is you can't prove a negative.
No, I didn't.
Okay, I don't know if you did. It seemed to me you might have been asking
let's stick to
theory.
quantum mechanics here.
Okay.
If someone looks at, I don't know, the many worlds, Copernican, whatever, inference, interpretation of quantum mechanics, and then they use that to challenge something about what you said, there's self-consistent,
Inference, the tool of inference.
the tool of inference, and the universe being self-consistent. I would say that question being answered in the affirmative would give away that the person believes in scientism.
You may be right. It is a very complicated way to come.
I don't think it's complicated. I think it's very simple.
Okay, to me, I'm trying to find common ground in as much as it's possible, in a way that hopefully people watching the camera can understand.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's essential to really identify this tool of inference and how it works, because it's absolutely ubiquitous to all these discussions. And unless you understand the tool, everything else will just be chaos. Yeah.
Which is why I go back to definitions like you do.
And I think it's important, particularly because I've heard you and other people say you don't believe on inferences from induction, only deduction.
That, we never said that.
Oh, okay.
What I said,
Something close to that.
I'll explain and let's see if you disagree.
Okay.
I believe.
Sorry, you okay with that?
I believe.
I thought you were doing great. Yeah.
I believe inference as a deduction, conclusions made from inferences are valid. But I believe inferences made from induction can be overturned. However, if someone believes in a very scientific worldview, then they will treat conclusions made from inferences, which are inductive, in a way that are deductive. And a classical example that came about just about now is the discussion between Dennis Noble and Richard Dawkins, where something that was in the data from an inductive point of view, the selfish gene perspective, the central dogma, and all of that stuff. And that is being challenged by Dennis Noble's systems biology perspective.
You asked me to watch it, and I did, and it was gemules and feedback
Did you watch
loops.
it?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did, and then I watched your reaction to it as well. So
With
I tried to, and then you didn't turn up for a while, and we didn't get to discuss.
Because I was in Africa.
Because you're in Africa, congratulations.
So, look, what I was trying to get to is that that's a classical example where induction has been given a status greater than it should have. And that's what I disagree with. I disagree with people treating inductive conclusions as if they're very strong. However, I understand why you're saying this, because people accuse me of rejecting inductive conclusions. I don't.
Okay.
I don't believe you can.
Well, then it would be very constructive if we could have a conversation maybe now where we both clarify our understanding of that tool and how it works, yeah? Can I give an example of how I think it works, okay? So there's an eternal tool used in all the sciences and philosophy. It's the same tool. If you use it with regard to matter, it becomes the physical sciences. If you use it with regard to philosophy, then it becomes more abstract and conceptual, but it's always the same tool. It works like this. You use an induction, which is you observe something in the universe empirically, and then you see if there's a repeating pattern, because you assume as an axiom you live in a self-consistent universe. So the example Robert Pirsig gives in his book, Designing the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, is you're on your motorbike, you're driving down the road, it goes over a bump, the bike backfires, yeah? Empirically you experience this. You drive along again, it goes over another bump, it backfires. You experience this. It does a third bump, it backfires, right? You've now noticed a pattern of behavior, and you start to develop an axiom about the bike, a theory, which is this bike backfires when it goes over bumps, yeah?
Okay.
It's a postulate, yeah? It's an idea you have. So you've created an axiom or a postulate about the bike, which you're now going to test. You've used induction to arrive at it. You've got your axiom. Now you're going to travel into the future because you see a bump coming up ahead and you go, I'm now going to use deduction to predict that when I go over it, it will backfire. You test the hypothesis in the future, and if it happens, it reinforces the axiom. And if it doesn't happen, you go, there's something wrong with my axiom, right? Now that axiom can never be 100%. This has been pointed out by Kurt Gödel, this has been pointed out by David Hume, and I think Russell's paradox, that essentially, whatever your system of inference is, you're going to need a brute fact assumption in. Somewhere at the bottom of all of these inferences will be an assertion of faith. And this is why I'm so keen on religion, despite the fact you think I'm an atheist.
No, I don't.
Okay, well, by your terms, I almost virtually am, but I think we both value faith. We understand that faith is pivotal to the entire thing, including the tool of inference itself. So if we can all agree we're using that tool on how to use it diligently, then I think we can move
I don't actually disagree with anything you said there. And in fact, that view is the view of Imam Ghazali.
Right.
That view is a classic Islamic view. We don't dismiss induction. Shoaib Ahmed Malik, I'm not sure if you've seen him online. He's someone who's written a paper. If you Google his name and Google Imam Ghazali in induction, you will see he's written on this topic as well.
Okay. So ultimately, every human being is going to have to make some assertion of faith.
Yeah. I might just bring up the
in
paper.
making a wise assertion of faith, because all of your life and your thinking is going to evolve from that assumption.
But here, the example.
Can I just push back a little bit?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm bringing up the paper.
Yeah. So look, I totally agree with you that in the core essential level, there must be some level of faith that things will be consistent in an internally coherent
That's
universe.
one of the axioms. There are others, because I think Muslims, as a generalization, they have the axiom of self-consistency. They also have the axiom that the Quran is divine revealed truth and it is speaking truth. So they're running with two axioms. So when they run their inferences, they're seeing, does it tick both boxes? Does it fix with our axiom that the Quran is accurate, and does it fix with self-consistency? And if it doesn't match with either of those two axioms, then you've got to rethink your position.
But I want to point out what I think is very important in your sentiment, right? That when you're describing the backfiring of the motorcycle, right?
Sure.
What you're indicating is the motivation behind how we believe in truth, which is to minimize faith. Right? Yeah. Because in your example, right, the reason why you constructed this axiom was because it was based on probability.
Yeah.
The probability of evidence at hand.
Yes.
Right? And faith is the core necessity, maybe.
You want to minimize
it as much as possible.
Are you familiar with Donald Hoffman? He's a mathematician, he's out there, and he's very advanced. He says you've got to put all of your miracles at the beginning of your argument. He understands. Even the people now, the scientists, they're also understanding. You can't get away from the faith thing. You can't get away from the necessity of the miracle.
Because the example that you brought, you cannot apply it about the existence of the universe. Because there is no kind of a pattern that we can go through to say that the pattern.
So this is the book you should download. It's for free.
Thank you. Islam and the Evolution of Al-Ghazali and the Modern Evolutionary Paradigm. Okay.
And you will also find other papers where Shoaib is speaking about induction and its value in Islam.
Okay.
So our classical view does not dismiss induction as, because it's not deductive, we're not going to take it seriously.
Could we agree that induction for most things is 99% good, but it's not perfect, yeah? For most living, you know, if every time I drop something, it goes down, not up. I use induction to infer gravity, and we all behave this way.
Can I just qualify that?
Yeah, sure.
I would say in medicine, yes. In engineering, yes. Theologically, no.
Okay. Now the distinction.
What do you think? What do you think?
I think
special pleading, isn't it?
I think I don't know. It may be special pleading. I think that you may be right, but I hope you're not. But what I am confident is when you create a theological or philosophical position that then chooses to interface with a physical science and quote that from that physical science, you are then obliged to obey the rules of that physical science.
I don't agree with that.
Well then you need to be clear that the assessment you're giving of scientific data isn't purely a scientific view. It's being underpinned by a deeper axiom than the scientists feel obliged to. All they feel obliged to is to be as
against
objective
the
as possible
second law of
and present
thermodynamics,
brute
where it
force
says
wherever they
universal
go.
entropy
But
has
you
to
think that can only be done within the context
He's not against it. He's the one who was
the
saying
sanctity of the Quran.
Not necessarily. It could be a philosophical point.
Theory, this universal.
Or a philosophical point.
Okay.
But the fact that
Would you
you're
agree?
transparent about that difference from the outset, we're good.
Would you agree if I did the latter of what you described, I would be self-consistent?
Yeah, and all self-consistency, I think, is what we owe each other at a minimum. I don't happen to share your belief that the Quran is literally true, but I'm happy to go that it's 90% excellent, which for me means it's pretty damn good. Apparently for you that's not good enough, but we can differ.
No. My point that I was making when you said induction is 99% good or and 1%.
In localized environments.
What I meant by that is that if you want to make conclusions about, say, vaccines, you want to make conclusions about whether a building is safe. You could do that from an engineering point of view or medical point of view. But when it comes to theology, we should not be using induction to inform theological conclusions.
Well, I think the only... Then I am confused, and let's try and really eat this one out. The only tool I have, I believe, is faith and inference. So those are my tools, and you seem to be arguing that I should somehow abandon inference when it comes to theology and philosophy. Inference is the tool, and an intrinsic part of inference is induction.
Looked at not contemporary, say if I existed 150 years ago. This was a time when certain people were of the view that the Earth is it's a couple of million years old, it's not billions. Now if I made a theological point saying God created the Earth 6 billion years ago, 10 billion years ago, if I made particular theological inferences based upon the current scientific understanding, that would be wrong. That's what I'm pointing to. And this has happened in the past, by the way. People have used things in science and said, well, this is what God intended, this is what God wanted. And I believe that's wrong.
You may have a point. I'm trying to think of something I can say that I think we'd agree on. I think the function of logic and facts is to eliminate bad ideas. It doesn't identify necessarily what's totally true, but you can use the tool of inference to eliminate things which are very likely to be bad ideas. Can we agree that that's its function?
No, I think that's pretty reasonable.
If somebody comes with a philosophical, theological axiom that the Earth is 7 million years old, and then because they're interfacing with physics, and the physics evidence says, well, if when we use this tool, we honestly discover it's like 8 billion years old, then I think the theological axiom, if it's wise, should cede to the factual axiom about the physics. It doesn't mean that at the physical level or the theological level, the metaphysical level, it's got to do anything, but it should cede to the pure brute physics of the world.
And this I've been saying for years. And this is something which I believe anybody that subscribes to a scientistic worldview, somebody believes in a sort of hyper-imperialistic worldview, would not agree to.
Okay, well then I'm not on their team.
No, I know you're not.
Okay.
But I do debate people who do believe in that type of empirical scientific worldview.
I put it to you, they're low-hanging fruit. Okay, those people, I think, they're missing the point. You're right. Scientists.
But there's a lot of them.
Okay, I'm sure there's a lot of them. But
And they happen to be new atheists as well.
Luckily, you and I aren't them.
What
So
about
get the
Nicholas,
best
by
out
the
of
way?
our
He was
discussion.
involved. He was involved.
Oh yes.
We don't want to neglect him, by the way.
Into scientism either, are you?
I'm not even sure what you fully mean by that.
Scientism means, I think, that you believe in a totally reductionist view of the universe, which would eliminate all the metaphysical components which seem to be inevitable.
Your epistemology starts and ends with science.
I believe consciousness is an illusion.
Okay, but wow. Okay, we disagree on that one. Okay, I think you and I would both disagree with this.
Firstly, I want to ask you, do you think that's a scientific conclusion or a philosophical conclusion?
I think it's a scientific one.
Okay, why?
Because you would need evidence to beg to differ.
Okay, so here's where I think you need to look back at the question that I asked you. I asked you, is it a scientific conclusion or a philosophical one? You said a scientific one.
Yes.
That means you believe consciousness, your concept of consciousness is empirical.
No, I believe that the absence of my consciousness is empirical.
But that's a slightly different point to what I was making.
Sounds silly, but
No, okay.
yeah.
So, Tony, I think we're probably going to agree here. Would you say Let me ask the same question, Tony.
Sure. What?
Consciousness.
Sorry, that's not fair. I've got you holding.
I asked Nicholas a question which I'll ask you so we understand where we're coming from. I asked Nicholas his idea that consciousness is an illusion. Is it a scientific conclusion or a philosophical conclusion? He said scientific one. Do you believe it can be...
I don't believe that's a scientific conclusion.
Yes.
I think that's a metaphysical conclusion.
Yes, and that's my view.
And I think also it's inconsistent because when I say...
Can you give me water if you have any water, bro? If there are any water bottles here?
That doesn't mean you deny that
Sheikh, is this yours?
consciousness is happening as a point of fact. You don't
I have
deny
it.
the reality of
Thank you.
qualia. You simply think it's delusional. Yeah? Yes. Okay, well that's different. I'm totally... I don't think it's contestable that I am. I think qualia, the experience itself is definitely happening. Though my diagnosis of what the experience is may be mistaken. I'll use inference, I'll use intuition, but I can always be wrong. We always know that, yeah? But the one thing I can surely be 100% sure of is I am.
Yep.
Yeah?
I agree.
We all agree. So it's good, we've got these things we agree on. We agree I am is a definite statement. We agree how the tool of inference works. We agree the tool of inference has flaws and can't be perfect and will require a brute assertion, including one of faith. And hopefully we can agree that then we should build our assertions of faith as wisely as possible. For example, if you start building models of the world in your head that need 200 assertions of faith, I don't think you're being parsimonious.
Yeah, I agree. So let's make sure Nicholas is following the trail of thought because we have a lot of these discussions in the park. So his point and my point is your idea that consciousness is an illusion cannot be scientifically justified. It's a philosophical point you're making.
Okay. So the reason why I say it's scientific is because with my understanding of science, right, that science is having this loyalty to measurable, repeatable phenomena, right? And when I say that consciousness is an illusion, is because there's no evidence or measurable, repeatable phenomenon to make a distinction between what is real consciousness versus, synthetic consciousness.
The problem there is you've already assumed your conclusion. You've assumed consciousness has an empirical basis.
No, I'm assuming that. So from my worldview.
So
right,
wait. Let's just slow down. Does consciousness have an empirical basis?
No, it can't.
No, then it cannot be disproven empirically if it does not have an empirical basis.
Okay, so
do you see the point there?
My belief system is based off of evidence.
No, but
so
first,
everything isn't true until there's evidence for it.
No, but look,
your belief system has to be limited. If you're only willing to accept empirical evidence, you can never cover the entire cosmology and the entire metaphysics because you're precluding things which are not empirical. I can never prove you're in there. You can never prove I'm in here. I intuitively and inevitably know I'm in here, and I have considerable faith that you are in
third person consciousness.
And I discard the faith. Okay. I'm just saying I don't know what I don't know.
You can't discard the faith. You're using it. You are having faith that I'm in here and he's in there. We're not just all...
It's inescapable.
Zombies.
Faith is inescapable, my friend.
My position, right? Is it when you're saying, oh, I'm in here, I'm like, do I really know that? Right?
No, I'm not saying you know it in the epistemological sense of 100% certainty because you can't. What I'm saying is that you know intuitively you are, and now you're inferring that I am as well, and it's a very good bet.
Can I? Okay, look. Here's where
the difference between you and I. For example, when you define yourself that I am, and he is, and you are, that means you literally have the consciousness to decide this.
So look, Nicholas. Me and him agree on something that we disagree with you on. But I'm now going to propose something that you may both disagree on. I believe the best explanation of consciousness is Allah, God. What do you think of the idea?
I don't believe in consciousness as such.
Okay.
Wow.
So,
you think it's an illusion, and that sentence predicates on it, in some sense, existing. So you do believe in consciousness.
I believe that there is a myth of Santa Claus, but I don't believe that there is a Santa Claus.
No, we're not asking you to diagnose. You may be dreaming now, you may be in a matrix, but experience is happening to you. Irrefutably and intuitively, yes? What you're experiencing now is not nothingness. Therefore, it is something.
If your definition of consciousness is just experiencing things,
pure qualia. I think John Bevecchi calls it valence qualia. It's the first wave of qualia, and Daniel Dennett says it's before you've diagnosed or identified it, and then we've got filters in it, biological, conscious, and unconscious, that try to diagnose what's coming in. But the fact that stuff is coming in is irrefutable.
So I'll validate the idea of sensation and experience, but I don't want to validate the idea idea of like will and free will and such.
We're not that's way
We're
down
not talking
the road.
about the will.
Okay.
We're not drawing any of those conclusions.
Yeah.
They're up for grabs and to be discussed.
If by consciousness you just mean experiencing things, then we're in agreement.
Does that work for you now? We've got a foundation.
I mean, I think that's an okay way of beginning the conversation, but I think the problem that I had with what you were saying earlier is by pretty much most of the statements you said so far in these conversations, it seems like for you, science is the adjudicator for all truth.
I believe evidence is, and that science is a tool to that.
But you've always defined evidence empirically.
Yes.
So that basically means for you, science is evidence, is the only evidence.
Well, science is the tool to gaining evidence.
Right, but evidence has always been defined by you from an empirical perspective, and that's the problem of scientism. I think you're suffering from it.
Scientism doesn't understand the limitations on its purview.
Yeah.
There are certain things, pure subjective experience is not empirically quantifiable. I cannot know that my wife loves me. I live my life and have to live my life with a belief that she does or doesn't. In reality, if I could get in her head, she either does or doesn't to a varying. It's not does she love me or doesn't me, it's to what degree does she, yeah? Now I make a guess as to how much she does. There is a truth in her head I can never see. It's not empirically quantified, but I live my life on the basis of these profound assertions of faith, probabilities, yeah? All of
Which is not empirical, basically.
Which, by the way, I want to get to a point. I wanted your thoughts, and Nicholas, your thoughts. If consciousness exists, do we first all agree consciousness exists?
Now we do.
Okay.
So
now, I may say something. I'm not sure if Tony agrees or disagrees. I believe the best explanation of consciousness, firstly, has to be something metaphysical, not scientific.
Okay.
I'm using modal logic, so I'm going, I can see about 3 different possible universes. One of them is the one you describe. I can't discount it. I want to keep thinking it through.
The one with God.
I believe the options seem to be consciousness is either bottom up, in other words, it arises as an emergent property of matter.
Monism.
And monism, sorry?
As in the mind is the brain at work.
Yeah. So we start with base matter, it upgrades, it becomes, organism.
I'm a dualist, Cartesian dualist, so I would say that's not true.
Okay, fine. Nonetheless, there's a top-down, there's a bottom-up model which is increasingly
complex.
Because it yields a lot of predictive power, like anesthetic and stuff. It shows the entanglement between neurology and consciousness is clearly demonstrated by the fact that if I take general anesthetic, it will knock out my consciousness. So I can't deny a level of entanglement. That doesn't mean it's a one-way trip.
Okay, sure. But I just want to say one small point about this. When someone challenges monism like I do,
I don't believe it's monism, so we're using different language.
Sure, but the mind is the brain at work, let's call it that.
Okay.
I believe when someone like myself who's a Cartesian dualist, we will never deny the entanglement, and we will never allow entanglement to be a sufficient argument for the mind is the brain at work.
Agree. I agree.
Oh, you agree? Fantastic.
All I'm saying is, I'm trying to put facts on the table.
Sure.
And then
so what's the third option?
Well, that was the first option. But putting the facts on the table, we agree there seems to be a causal connection between the brain and the mind.
I agree.
It doesn't mean it's not two-way traffic. It doesn't mean the brain is the prime mover. But there's clearly, I think we can empirically...
No one denies that. No one denies
so
that.
let's put that on hold as a fact. We're going to have to work with that. The second option is the top-down, which is the more traditional religious view.
God, Allah,
which is sort of like the soul descends into the body, drives
God
it around for a while, and then it returns, And ironically, in the sciences of people like Donald Hoffman and Bernardo Castro and others, they're increasingly going, look, we're not making too much ground now with a bottom-up model. Maybe we need to look again at the top-down one. They're coming full circle back to kind of where you guys are to an extent, but there are certain things they profoundly disagree with you about. That's the second.
And they're not religious, by the way.
They're not religious. Well, actually, I would say they think they are. They're religious the way I am, maybe, some of them. The third way of looking at it...
Hoffman is not... Okay, I mean, as in, they're definitely not religious from my perspective.
Viveki, I would argue, is, and Bernardo Castro, I would argue, is, and so on. Anyway, the other way of looking at it is panpsychism, which is that matter and energy are intrinsic, matter and consciousness are intrinsically aspects of the same thing. So it's not bottom up, it's not top down, it's all simultaneously in a way we can't wrap our head around.
Can I just add a little qualification to that? As a Muslim, I believe in a type of panpsychism and dualism. Okay. So you can believe in both.
Okay.
So for example, as a Muslim, we believe everything is worshipping God, including rocks and trees, so there's a level of consciousness in everything. The ground that you walk on will testify for or against you. Do you understand? So we can have a pan-psychism perspective married with a dualistic perspective.
I totally support that. I think the wise thing to do.
So you've got
Say your shahada, man. Just say your shahada.
Total
And you're supposed
logic,
to be
and
Muslim
I'm
then.
going, I don't know. I think humility is a good thing, and ultimately I don't know. So what I